Hello.
Question, why is it the TAC calls have a waiting room, but none of the other OpenSSF calls have a waiting room?
Some of them do.
Oh,
It's the host has to start the meeting, and the TAC call in particular is a sometimes large one.
that's fair. I was always curious. 'Cause I'm like, yeah, and I've also noticed that you, if you join late, you also have to get accepted, or you have to get invited later, and that's kind of like you're sitting there for a little bit, like until somebody sees it.
Yeah, many of the larger meetings, particularly at the governing board and TAC level across different LF projects, all are host moderated like that, just for resisting Zoom bombing, as it were.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So looking at the attendance list, it looks like we do have a quorum for the full new TAC. So welcome, everybody. We'll give it another 30 seconds and then jump in and get started. All right, we will get going. All right, so yeah, first off, I know I just briefly mentioned it, but certainly a warm welcome to all of our new and returning TAC members for 2023. So for those of you that weren't aware, the governing board did a process to decide on the appointed members and came to those appointments for Zach Steinler, Krob, and Arnaud. So welcome to the TAC to those new folks. The first order of business for the newly seated TAC is to call for a nomination for a chair and vice chair. So just as I know I sent a note out to the TAC private mailing list last week to this effect, but the role of the chair is effectively to do a couple things. Number one, they own the agenda for this biweekly meeting. Second, by the charter of the OpenSSF, the chair of the TAC does hold a voting seat on the governing board. So you're expected to attend the governing board meetings and participate in dialogue there. And then finally, really serve as as a key communication and connection point within the working groups, the projects, the other TAC members, as well as the governing board subcommittees that do exist. So there's the public policy committee, the marketing committee, the governance subcommittee. There's a number of other subgroups that are really focused on doing a fair bit of the hands-on work of the foundation from a leadership point of view, so that when the governing board as a whole does convene on a monthly basis, that it's more of an update and decision-making forum rather than a working session. So last year, when we went through this process, we had Ava and myself both interested in holding the chair seat. And so the email that I sent out last week was effectively to ask the new TAC members for this year for nominations to those that were interested in kind of taking on that responsibility. In that note, I did denote that I will not be nominating myself for chair in this year due to other obligations I have at work and at home. But it's been certainly an honor to serve in this capacity over the last year. So this will be officially my last meeting as chair. But as I see here on the email thread, as well as in the notes, it does seem that we have multiple TAC members that are interested in assuming that role. So what I would like to propose and ask for perhaps some support for Kurt or some of the other operations folks on the TAC is to like to run a quick OPA vote for the 7 TAC members to ultimately nominate folks as chair or vice chair going forward. So yes, and I see in the notes as well, thank you, Ava, for your support over the past year. It's been very nice to have your collaboration and input on a lot of what we've been able to accomplish.
And thank you, Bob. It's been a pleasure and an honor to get to work with you in this role. Thank you for all the work you've done behind the scenes to keep this organization running and going forward and getting better.
So I guess appreciate that. So I guess what I would say is, like, if we're all okay with moving to OPA vote to handle a vote for chair, and then assume that this second vote getter would get the vice chair position, is that a fair assumption for all? Or do we want to do a separate vote for those?
I think last year we only had the 2 of us running, so it was pretty easy to say whoever didn't get chair got vice chair. We have multiple this time. It might be better to do a separate vote for vice chair or a separate run for vice chair. I want to put that idea forward. And I know other organizations I'm part of do those separately because the responsibilities are also different and the time commitment is different. So for example, for myself this year, while I would love to step into the chair role, having worked with Bob for the past year, I have a pretty good sense of it. It would, if the time commitment is as much as it has been for Bob in the past year, in the next year, I would not be able to fill the same shoes. I have 2 other foundations I'm also involved in, and I feel like being the chair would spread me a little too thin. So I will happily run for the vice chair, but not for the chair role, just to respect this org's needs.
I'd agree there. I'd be fine splitting it up. And actually, you popped something into my head when you mentioned this. I don't remember if we codified the vice chair role at all, actually. I remember we kind of just made it up at the last minute last year. Maybe we should do that at the same time. But
not a bad idea.
Either way makes sense.
So I guess any objections from any TAC members around holding 2 votes, 1 for chair, 1 for vice chair, calling once, twice. All right, I guess maybe looking virtually at Kurt, is this something that you would be able to help with in terms of setting up this week?
Yes, absolutely. I could get that started. If we can say that we will close on nominations at the end of this meeting, maybe, and then I will immediately turn this around and get this started in OPA vote.
All right. Any objections to that as the plan of record? All right. We will proceed with that. Thanks, Kurt, and thanks for all the throwing your names into the proverbial hat, and look forward to handing over the reins. All right. Next on the agenda for today, we have, I want to pause and maybe do a quick reorder because I don't see Mike Dolan on the attendee list.
Yeah, I'm looking too. I just pinged him.
Should we defer?
Well, the thing is that Mike was only available until past. So he's not strictly required to be here, but I wanted to invite him to be here in case the TAC had any questions for him about this policy. So give it 10 minutes and we can come back to this in 10 minutes. But if he does join the call, can we hop onto that topic? Because I know he's only got limited time.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Perfect. All right. I will monitor and make sure. And if he joins, I will interrupt.
Got it. All right, so I know next that we had on the agenda was Jessica from Intel to present that proposal. I wasn't clear, Krob, how much time Jessica would need, or Jessica, how much time you need to
10 minutes?
10 minutes sounds great. So
yeah.
Yeah, I think 10 minutes is perfect. So if we're ready to go, awesome. Thank you very much for having me. It's nice to be here and see some familiar faces. Actually, some of the faces on this call have seen the secure software guiding principles or secure software covenant already. And I think we sent around the link. So hopefully people have had an opportunity to preview and digest. It's not terribly long. I want to say it's just a couple minutes worth of reading. But basically the idea that we had back around the time of the Open Source Leadership Summit was, wow, wouldn't it be great if there was some sort of publicly facing pledge, if you will, that could reassure end users, and whether those end users are companies or individuals alike, that the software that they're getting from software producers is being sourced and is being produced with specific eyes towards security, and a promise that people were taking, or that software producers were taking specific steps to help secure the software supply chain. And so from that idea came what was first called the Secure Software Covenant, but then we did some research on the origin of the word covenant and realized that that one wasn't so great. At the moment, I'm calling it guiding principles, but I think pledge, actually, it sounds like a good thing. You can take a pledge or make a pledge. And I wanted to share it with the larger OpenSSF TAC, because what I'd really like to have happen is that this becomes something that OpenSSF adopts and promotes. So it's not just, Intel standing, waving a flag saying, hey, we have these ideas and we think it would be great for people to sign up. But that if OpenSSF said, hey, we think these ideas are great and we'd like people to sign up. I envision a future perhaps where there's a list of companies that have adopted the pledge, or perhaps there's a badge that people can put. Oh, sorry, looks like my camera just crapped out. A badge that people or project owners could put on their repos indicating that they had taken this pledge. But that's really why I'm here today, is just to say hello and get any feedback from you folks that I haven't heard from yet.
Awesome. Thanks, Jessica. I see Dustin has their hand up.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I'm very much on board with the idea. I like this a lot. I wanted to share that I am aware that some folks from GitHub are working on something very similar, and came and presented this at the Securing Software Repos work group, kind of with a plan to ask major software repository providers to sign off on it. I can drop a link in here. I think it's okay for it to be public because they've shared it in that working group. It's very similar, so it might be good to sort of reach out to them on the line, and I can put you in contact.
So ironically, I have reached out to them, but they didn't mention to me that they were working on this. So I wonder if
might have been different folks from GitHub. So.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I can't imagine that I'm, the Intel's the only group that has had this idea. So maybe it's a good opportunity to get back with them and realign. Although, well, I guess I can get more details from them, but that sounds like it's a GitHub specific proposal. They're not seeking like an OpenSSF or a broader industry landing for it.
Yeah, so I think their goal, not to speak for them, but I think their goal was to get like similarly broad ecosystem folks to sign off on this, large organizations and things like that.
Thank you. Good to know.
Dan?
Yeah, thanks for sharing this again, Jessica. I know we chatted a while ago and I saw a draft of this a few months ago, back when it was still called the Covenant. I shared this internally. I got a bunch of feedback from our team and with some other folks. And the initial reaction everyone had was, oh, this could go over really poorly because people might assume that it's companies asking open source maintainers to follow these principles. And as soon as I explained, no, it's the opposite. It's a pledge companies will take for their own stuff. The reaction completely flipped the exact opposite way, and everyone loved it. So just kind of surfacing that as a potential, I don't want to say risk, or just something we have to be very clear about with the messaging here, that this is not like an unfunded mandate. Large companies are placing on open source maintainers. Right. It's more the reverse. I think people are just so worried about that they're assuming bad intentions here, but it's better to be safe than sorry with it.
That's really good feedback. Thank you. Yeah, I have not done a lot of work on the messaging, or the how to position the positioning of it. So thank you. That's very good feedback.
Brian?
Apologies for my camera not working. I think attaching this to companies is very interesting from a PR point of view. It'd be great to get a critical mass of the organizations involved in groups like OpenSSF or whatever, to be able to say, as a company, Intel, ChainGuard, whomever attaches their name to this. I wonder if there might also be some value, and I don't know if it's the same pledge or a separate one, to attaching this to projects. Basically the maintainers on the project saying, this is a credo we will live by as maintainers. maintainers, and you can hold us accountable to, and it becomes a relatively standardized document, kind of like security.md, that you find at the top of a repo. And then the interesting thing about that is then the different tools, security scorecards and the like, that try to compute, trust scores for projects can incorporate this as one signal among many in, whether a project could be more trustworthy or not.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. I did envision it being not just large companies, but projects also. So I think the language that we used was software producer. So it could apply to both. But that's a really neat idea about having it at the repo level and having it being something that counts towards the OpenSSF scorecard score.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Mike Dolan just joined the call.
Oh.
Is that, yeah? Can we take a Ava? Can I jump in front of you? Sorry. Thank you. Hi. So I have been working with the Open Source Securities Foundation Vulnerability Disclosure Working Group to establish two documents. There is the Model Outbound Vulnerability Disclosure Policy, version 0.1, and then also the Open Source Outbound Vulnerability Disclosure Policy, which is basically stating, hey, we are adopting the model policy. I've sent it to the TAC a couple times. I hope that you all have taken an opportunity to take a look at this. And I was hoping to call for a vote on adopting this policy, as well as the plan for is that Alpha Omega will probably be the predominant user of this policy. And basically we will work with it and use it and basically experience how it actually works. And if we have any problems, maybe make some modifications down the road. But as it stands, this is a policy that we would be moving forward with at this exact moment, and continue discussions with the Vulnerability Disclosures Working Group if we run into problems with it. So the ask at this point is, hey, TAC, are you at this point interested in being willing to ratify this as an official OpenSSF policy?
So as I noted in the doc, I wanted to note that Jonathan's correct. We have discussed this at prior meetings. So from the point of view of awareness, I think this has been an open issue and an open dialogue for a bit. I also want to recognize that we did not get a full TAC seated until last week. So I believe I wanted to make sure to give the new TAC members that maybe had either not been in attendance in the past or not had been aware of this to not have a perception that we were trying to rush to a vote immediately on the first meeting after being seated. But that being said, if I guess explicitly Zach and Arnaud, if both of you feel comfortable with the content here and ultimately making a vote right now, I wanted to make sure that you had a chance to, if you wanted more time, to just say, hey, I would like another couple days to look at this, and we can drive that vote on this electronically. If there's no need to delay, we can certainly, I think, move on now. But wanted to make sure that we were being inclusive to those that are newly appointed to the TAC that may not have realized that they would have to make a decision on this today.
Right.
No, so speaking for myself, I'm fine. I had actually a chance to look into it and contribute to some of this, so there's no problem. Thank you.
I'm also fine moving forward with a vote. I've had a chance to review.
I also want to give the opportunity. Mike Dolan is only here for the next 10 minutes because he's got a meeting at the top of the half hour. So if there are any TAC members here that Mike Dolan is the legal counsel for the LF. So if anybody here has any questions for Mike about this or any other documents, I wanted to give that opportunity to you all to ask him anything while he's here.
I see Dustin has their hand up.
Yeah, I think I'm okay with the structure of this, and I have had a chance to review it as well. I'm a little curious about, I wanted to raise that some of the pros from this seems identical to pros in Google's app security policy or vulnerability disclosure policy. I just want to make sure that we're okay with that. So, some of the wording is exactly the same. So I do see that it sort of credits several policies at the end, but it seems very similar to that policy.
Yes, you are absolutely correct. It is basically a direct copy and paste of Google's policy with heavy modifications, heavy modifications. but there is some verbiage that is directly. Google's policy does explicitly state that they welcome you to use their policy as a basis for other policies. So just as from a licensing or permission perspective, there I don't believe is any issue there. But I do, yes, that I just wanted to offer that context.
Just to clarify your potential concern there, Dustin, is it that it was copied without attribution, or is it that we just want to raise the fact that it came from Google?
Yeah, it just looks very similar, and being from Google, I'm a little concerned that it could be perceived as us, Google forcing the same policy onto OpenSSF. So there's some things in it's just prose, right? The structure I think is okay to be the same, but some of the sentences like what we believe as OpenSSF are the same thing that come from that policy.
Makes sense. Any other points of discussion before we move on to a vote?
I can offer context on why I chose to go that route, if that helps. I've used Google's policy as my own disclosure policy for many years. And I have liked it. I've liked the rationale that Google has, especially involving the Project Zero FAQ that is published, describing not just the policy, but also why the policy is implemented the way it is. I found the rationale quite compelling, and the data that they use in their FAQ to back that up also very compelling. So it wasn't just, ooh, here's a policy, let's start from there. It was, I've been using this policy, the rationale behind it made a lot of sense. And that's why I picked it as the starting point for us to build off of for the Open Source Security Foundation.
Eva.
I thought I had all my questions already answered, and I hope this one just came to me. I hope I worded correctly. Understanding that the primary intent is for this to cover activities under Alpha Omega. Has consideration, a bit of a question for Mike and others, has consideration been made for if this policy is adopted and used by other groups within OpenSSF that are not Alpha Omega, recognizing it has a different sort of foundational structure than other projects, does the same policy work as well?
So the design of the policy is two parts. There is the Open Source Security Foundation is adopting the model policy, and the model policy itself is written in such a way that it does not include the Open Source Security Foundation name in it at all. And the idea behind that is that any individual organization, research org can say, we follow the model disclosure policy. And so for example, I sent it to a research organization this morning saying, hey, we are going to publish this. And they were like, oh, that's awesome. This looks really good. So they may adopt it as their policy as well.
To clarify, Jonathan, I don't simply mean does it work in that people can copy and follow it, but whenever one has a disclosure policy like this, depending on against what project one is finding or publishing vulnerabilities, there can be repercussions.
Oh, you're talking about like legal repercussions. Are we in some way implying a protection of those users of this policy? Is that the concern?
Potentially, yes.
I'm not a lawyer, but we can't provide like legal protection. Right. Like there's nothing like that. I mean,
so
Mike, do you want to speak for?
So first of all, I can't give anybody legal advice here. I represent the Linux Foundation, and the foundation is my client. So I want to be clear about that. Second of all, there's no way I can conceive of that you could provide legal protection to anybody who adopts anything, including the code that you're producing or any other things that you're producing. So I wouldn't set that expectation. When I did go through it, Ava, to be clear, there were some things I did change in what Jonathan had that gave me some concerns on that front. And so I actually removed them to make it not that we were implying that they had there was some language about safe harbors and things like that we cannot handle. So,
that's a different policy. That's the incoming.
Okay, well, no, there was some in this one too, I thought, Jonathan. So
no, there was not in this one, no.
Okay, so that's where I'm getting a little confused in which policy I'm reading by the day, but I don't think you want to make anything that would, any statements that would imply that there's some sort of, you know, liability-free zone, which I don't think we can offer anybody, even if we wanted to.
That's my understanding as well. This does not seem to state that as of when I last read it, but it does describe and sort of give an encouragement to anyone who's following this policy in the foundation to feel safe disclosing if they follow this policy.
I think this policy models what is industry best practice from what I've seen, and I don't have any issue with the foundation or any of its projects adopting it, if that's what you're asking.
Thank you, Mike. That is perfect.
Jack, then I want to also time bound this for a couple more minutes.
Okay, very quickly. I am not a lawyer, and this is not legal advice. But I was curious about whether in publishing this document, we just have a little blurb that says, this does not mean that the OpenSSF proposes to indemnify you in any way, blah, 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 get your own lawyer. Who you pay, something along those lines. Just a little blurb on the page where the model can be downloaded or copied from. Might be a possibility to offset that risk.
I would suggest doing something like that and making clear which projects are following this and which ones are not. And so if OpenSSF follows this, but SigStore does not, for example, I'm just spitballing here, then just making that clear. Or if this is an OpenSSF wide, all projects in the OpenSSF are agreeing to abide by this, that's the nuance I'm looking for that wasn't clear to me in the proposal.
The intention behind this is any reports outgoing from the Open Source Security Foundation that are using the Open Source Security Foundation banner as the source of that vulnerability report going out to some other organization will use this policy. Now, if you happen to be a member of the Open Source Security Foundation and you work for another organization, you don't have to use this policy. You can choose to use the banner of Open Source Security Foundation as the place where you're disclosing from and use this policy, but you do not have to. Right, that's an individual decision. Now, if the project is saying we're disclosing, then probably they should follow this policy, right? Alpha Omega is a project under the Open Source Security Foundation. We will be using this policy. I'm also an employee of the LF, but under the Open Source Security Foundation, so it will dictate my work. But yeah, I don't know if that.
I think, Jonathan, in that implicit in the conversation is that there's a communication that needs to be made out to the projects that there is now the expectation that if they're making a disclosure under the banner of the Open Source Security Foundation, that they follow this policy and make sure that they are aware of that.
Yes, I agree.
So switching back to I'll make this really clear. From the TAC perspective, are we voting on adopting this for OpenSSF or adopting this for all projects in the OpenSSF?
That is the idea, yes.
Not enough copy. Adopting this for Alpha Omega or for all projects?
The latter. The idea is that for all projects under the Open Source Security Foundation that are reporting vulnerabilities outbound, this will apply to all of those disclosures. Not income. This is not an incoming policy. This is all about outgoing reports.
Then I think that's
apply to other Linux Foundation projects not under the OpenSSF umbrella.
Well, if they chose to adopt it, but as the OpenSSF TAC, we don't dictate that.
Yeah, they would have to choose to adopt it. But Jeff, that's why I spent some time with Jonathan to turn this into a model policy, because I do think there's other projects that would be interested in adopting this, either the ones that exist currently or new ones that we are going to be hosting.
Yeah, that's where my head was going. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you all. I'm comfortable voting.
Any other questions?
Another bit of context. I did submit, I know it has not been ratified. I did submit this to DEF CON CFP closed yesterday. So I submitted it to the policy track for DEF CON to talk about and also announce to the world just, hey, you can adopt this as well. It's not necessarily contingent on this being accepted. If this doesn't get accepted, it's fine. The talk can always get dropped, but I did submit it to DEF CON. So, and just around announcement, they tend to like things to be, we can always communicate to the internal Open Source Security Foundation that people like we are adopting this, but DEF CON definitely likes things that are new. So large fanfare around this may not be as easy until DEF CON, but we can definitely communicate internally around the OpenSSF that this is the policy that will be adopted.
Arno?
Yeah, so actually it's very much on that point of communication. If we adopt this and say, well, this applies to all projects, I don't know how we do this, but we need to make sure projects are right. Could you hear me?
Could you repeat that, Arno?
I'm sorry. I was saying that, you know, if we want to adopt this for all working projects within OpenSSF, it's fine, but we have to make sure that we can communicate this effectively to all projects. I mean,
yeah, and I don't think, yes.
It's going to be obvious because you're actively looking for vulnerabilities core to your mission. For many other projects, it's not, right? So they may not realize, oh, wow, wait, there is a policy for this we need to follow. That's all.
I don't mind being the vehicle for
Yeah.
making sure that that gets articulated. And that's basically just emailing all the working groups and then maybe also joining some of the working group calls and communicating that explicitly. And I also know someone who attends a majority of all the working group calls too, who may be part of the.
Here's why I was asking to put a very fine point on it. We have a number of projects that are not working groups, not hosted in the working groups, right? Alpha Omega is one of 3 things that go by various names. The GNU Toolchain Initiative, for example, they are largely an independent entity in terms of functioning and self-governance. However, they are under the OpenSSF banner. Are they subject to this policy as well? And have they been consulted?
Brian, do you have any?
So to be clear, the project formerly known as GNU Toolchain Initiative is now being called Core Toolchain Initiative as of 4 hours ago. I didn't expect anybody here to know this yet, but we have received a cease and desist letter from the Free Software Foundation for the community that using GNU. So anyways, Core Toolchain Initiative, again, the scope of that would simply be for the infrastructure that's being provided to the GNU community. I can at least say that. And so it would just be limited to the scope of the infrastructure. It would not require the GNU toolchain projects themselves to use this policy and adopt it, because that's outside the scope of the governance of what we set up under Core Toolchain Initiative. And apologies if I mix up my acronyms here. Does that make sense, Ava?
It does. It's crystal clear and clear as mud at the same time. Since I'm not deeply involved in that project, I'm not sure exactly where that line would fall, but I think my point is well made that the
yeah, and this is my point, Jonathan, I've made earlier too. Like, we got to figure out a communications plan for the projects, a blog post for the wider community ecosystem.
Yeah.
You know.
Yes.
Asking the working groups to adopt this is easy. It's all of the technical projects that are also part of the OpenSSF that we don't see as often in the TAC calls. That we also need to do a little time to reach out to them. So that's the
I'm not aware of other parts of the OpenSSF that are conducting outbound vulnerability research, though. I think that was why perhaps this had skipped our mind to try to do a broad canvassing of the community. But we could be wrong, and maybe there's one more 2-week hop of a broadcast out in some way to the broader OpenSSF community as like a last call for comments. We could also just adopt this for Alpha Omega, but I think it's made much stronger by having been vetted by this group and could cover then other future vulnerability work done in other parts of OpenSSF. But yeah, that's why I think we wanted to skip ahead.
If the TAC sees value and votes to approve this, I know someone that has communications in their title and is a specialist in comms plans and has very good relationships with both Jonathan and Jennifer that we would be I could probably persuade that person to develop a formal communications plan and bring back to the TAC to show how we would manage the comms out to the working groups members and affiliated projects. And then we could include such things as the potential DEF CON talk as part of that comms plan, and Twitter and whatnot, or Mastodon. We don't say the T word anymore.
As long as that person wears a goose hat, I think you're fine. All right. Yep, right there. Awesome. All right, just being cognizant of time, it sounds like we're at a point where we can go ahead and make this a vote to cover the outbound policy for the entirety of the OpenSSF.
And also submitting to this, that this will also be, that we will also be creating and promoting the outbound policy as well. So the two parts, right? Adopting it officially as our own policy, and also publishing the model policy.
Publishing both, I think, is effectively what we're voting on, right?
Yes.
Working group wants to take on evangelization. That's not something the TAC needs to adjudicate here. All right, so to call for a vote, I guess what I'd like to do is just go ahead and call for either a +1 hands up or verbal yes in the Zoom tool. And we'll go ahead and count those and then have the record show that. If you use the reaction button in Zoom, that would be great. And then we will record that in the notes. So I see 1, 2, 3, and then a bunch of +1s in chat. So Zach, okay, so I think that means we have a 7-0 unanimous decision in support of the OpenSSF adopting this policy. If anybody sees it differently, let me know. Otherwise, we will write that down and go forward. Oh, too many buttons here. All right, great. Thanks, Mike, for showing up and for your input today.
I do have a quick question for the TAC. We are adopting this version at this point. If, as the Open Source Security Foundation as the Alpha Omega team operationalizes this policy, we run into problems where we need to modify it slightly, at what point would the TAC like to be readdressed and re-asked the question of, do you want to adopt this before we move forward with minor modifications of it?
I would say if there's a meaningful change in content, if it's a spelling error, we don't need to be in the middle of it. If it's hey, we think like we're going to say there's no obligation to do any reporting going forward. Obviously, that's a substantive context change that would be reviewed here. So I would say, use your best judgment. If it's anything beyond trivial, I would say tag us in GitHub on the PR, and we can drive dialogue there.
Even if it's things like changing time windows, that's a pretty important substantive change. So
I just wanted to understand and make sure that we were okay with. We need to make slight changes. That's okay. Operational changes, please advise with the TAC. Okay, thank you for that.
Typo fixes, changing a name on something, totally fine. Operational changes, come to the TAC.
What about clarifications? Things that are not clear that need to be further clarified. Do you want to be?
I would ask that you at least give the TAC an email to the TAC list saying, "Hey, here's the change we are going to make. We proposed. Do you have any feedback?"
Okay. All right, we can do that. Thank you for clarification about that. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Let's go back to the securing software guiding principles. If I messed that up, apologies. It's
no worries. So I saw in the chat, Eva had recommended that this go to a working group for broader social. Do you have a recommendation of which working group? Or one?
I think my comment that I tried to just quickly capture there, it sounds like a couple different groups, at least 2, had the same idea, as so often is the case. We all are looking at the same problem, want to solve it together. So I would like to, I didn't hear a request for any action from the TAC today.
It's probably premature.
Okay. Yeah. And I would suggest moving it into a working group to gather interested parties, refine the wording around it. It sounds like you got some good feedback on that today, and then come back to the TAC after there are, let's say, some sort of a critical mass of companies and maybe other projects outside the OpenSSF that are ready to agree to it.
Okay. And then of the various working groups that exist, the one that I've gone to before is the end user working group. I don't know if that would be appropriate. Again, it has a lot of the folks in it that I had spoken to offline.
What about the securing software repos working group? Since that is sort of the representative body most impacted by it.
Securing software repos. Okay. I will find out.
Head shakes.
See if I can get in
Dan,
there.
did you have a comment there? No?
Just look at me. I kind of feel like the scope, I mean, sorry, you know, I kind of feel like the scope is wider than what's covered in securing software repos. And I feel like the discussion that we've had about it already has been substantive in the end user working group. So I would like to encourage from an observer standpoint that the work continue there.
In the end user working group.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Zach, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I wanted to give some additional feedback. I didn't realize that this was targeting. Sorry?
Hey, Phil, can you go on mute, please?
Oh, I didn't realize that this was targeting companies as opposed to open source projects. I really appreciate that clarification. Another piece of feedback I wanted to give is that there's certainly some spectrum here between being short and easy to comprehend and like a fully fledged capability model. Some of these seemed more clear to me than others as to how I would implement or sort of like be able to live up to these principles. Like, you know, having a vulnerability disclosure program, great. That's pretty easy to thumbs up or thumbs down to say that, you know, you're meeting this or not. Things like employing developer practices that are in conformance with modern industry accepted methods. The challenge there is that, of course, those evolve over time. And so I know this is a very difficult request, but it's like the more specificity or the more concreteness where I can read something and say, yes, I do this, or no, I don't, the more successful I think this could be.
Okay, so I see, again, got to work on my messaging here. But taking a step back, I tried to write the principles as being sort of constitutional so that they wouldn't change very often. And then I'm envisioning that there would be like an implementation guide, something that gets updated regularly that goes into specifics like, hey, and if you're looking at number 4, you know, this could be satisfied by using OpenSSF scorecards or SigStore, or that would be a separate thing, a separate supplement that would provide implementation details. Do you think that would be palatable or acceptable?
Yes. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for that clarification. But yeah, I think maybe being able to see an example of that, even if it was just for one item, would help understand sort of the end-to-end cohesive purpose of those documents together.
Gotcha. Okay, I'll make sure that I get that together before I come back. Thanks.
Thank you.
I think I've gotten everything that I could have asked for today. So thank you. If it's okay with you, I'll go ahead and drop the call.
Oh, thanks for coming and thanks for contributing. Appreciate it.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, we have 2 more items on the agenda, although, Ava, I'm not sure we will have time for a substantive discussion on the CRA. So
no.
I guess we'll defer that to the first on the agenda next time, or we can take that offline to start dialogue, more dialogue over email.
I would still love 5 minutes at the end just to enter that topic.
Yeah, great. All right, so Mr. Scavetta, update from AO.
Awesome. And Bob and Jonathan and Brian, feel free to jump in if I've missed anything or get anything wrong. So again, AO mission, protect society by improving the security of open source software through direct maintainer engagement and expert analysis. That is our grounding. Our vision is that these critical open source projects are secure and that vulnerabilities are found and fixed quickly. Overall updates. So first, Microsoft will be providing an additional $2.5 million to support AO PO is in progress. We're expecting to press release it along with OpenSSF Day announcements next week. So please do not tweet this before it is fully public. But that'll keep us going for, definitely through the end of the calendar year and into 2024. We are planning an updated member agreement. This new will be an updated member agreement for AO contributors. This will allow organizations to come in at a 250K tier level. They do not get governance rights at that level. We will meet with them. There's a couple, we'll do logo trades and we'll meet with them once a month. We certainly want to hear their input and have that dialogue, but they do not get any control in how the AO funds are spent at that level. We have a summer mentorship, which I think you all should be aware of. We got about 180 applications. We have four spots. These are paid mentorships for 12 weeks, starting in June. We expect to have the final four selected in a few weeks. I realize that it's May already. It'll be fine. We also have an AO website, a little bit of swag, which should be available at OpenSSF Day. So come take a look. And we continue to do speaking engagements. There's a panel that Yesenia is leading at OpenSSF Day. As you heard, Jonathan's submitted a talk for DEF CON. Both of them have been great in getting the word out and having kind of consistent public dialogues about what we're doing and what we're trying to do. On the alpha side, we continue to get monthly updates from each of our partners. All of the updates, I'm not going to go into any detail. They're on the AO GitHub page under engagements. You can read about them. I believe everybody's giving something once a month. I think we're waiting for one engagement to submit recently. We have two new ones that we've approved. OpenSSL 3.1, we're doing a security audit through OSTIF. The RFP for that should have already been sent out. That will be happening over the summer. So we expect that by August-ish, we'll get the final results and fixes and all that back. We've also approved an engagement to better support Rust in the Linux kernel and basically driving Russell's forward. This is through ISRG and Proximo. So that we have not PO'd out. In fact, neither of these have we PO'd out, but we've approved both of them and we're moving forward. We're just waiting paperwork. So we have not publicly announced either of these, and we probably won't until we see we have like actual signatures. We have some other early discussions, 4 or 5 of these to, number one, help us kind of better achieve our mission. So things like, out of band, vulnerability detection, and essentially, I don't want to say franchise out the Omega model, but it's kind of what I mean. We pay an organization to find vulnerabilities and fix them according to our policies, to just kind of get separate streams and getting more stuff done. Last mile reporting is really hard. We've had lots of discussions on autofix. The idea being that we can technically submit a pull request with a fix for a security issue. That part's the easy part. The hard part is doing that in a private way. And the state of the art just isn't there yet. So we're trying different things, but one option there is to just outsource that out to an organization and basically turn money to security that way. So we're in discussions there. And then finally, kind of build in CI hardening. These are things that we can also pay to get large numbers of projects onboarded, and having an organization accountable to drive that on a daily basis. That's on the alpha side. On the Omega side, we talked about the outbound vulnerability reporting policies. The autofix stuff is harder, but that's slowly taking steps forward. And huge thanks to Jonathan for driving all this stuff. We do have a proof of concept automated tool to find appropriate disclosure mechanisms. So given left pad, how should I do it? Do they have private vulnerability reporting enabled? Do they use Tidelift? Is there just an email address? Is there a form you got to fill out? Is it Jira? I'm trying to figure that out in an automated way so that you can point at a project and like send it that way. Ultimately, this project is just about the discovery of those things. Assurance assertions is still in that like proof of concept-ish. It is available bit.ly/assurance assertions. Feedback would be very much appreciated in how to move this forward. I'm thinking about, how do I align this better with Guac, with in toto attestations and things like that. But conceptually, what's the larger view on this, and how does what facts are relevant so that a consumer can make policy decisions based off of that on what open source to use. So I only want to use open source that when scanned by one of these static analysis tools doesn't have any critical vulnerabilities. That would be an interesting gate to have. So this is not about like CVEs. This is, underlying software quality based off of analysis. In the triage portal, we're finalizing it. We're just hitting some bugs. We're hoping to get that out in public soon. As a proof of concept, we'll iterate on that, and we have lots of stuff to do there. Finally, we have a community meeting tomorrow. So if you want to hear this again and slower, come tomorrow morning. I think we'll all be there next week at OpenSSF Day. We hang out on Slack. Do you guys have any questions? I think I have 2 minutes.
I think you have a slide
the entire time.
Yeah, Michael, I think you have are these slides available question?
Yes, I will add the slides to the TAC meeting notes. I just have to make a link.
Got it.
Yeah. So Ava, to the security MD thing. Yes. So the way that we've been approaching this is Security Insights already provides us in a very structured way. Parsing text in Security MD is terrible, but it's we fall back to that. Like that's one of the places we look. But Security Insights, it's right there. It's YAML list.
Let me be a little more specific here. I would love to see a normalized, formalized format for that, much like a decade ago in the early days of SPDX, the industry invented licensed shortcodes to create machine readable, easily parsable way to figure this out for licensing. Some folks at MITRE are interested in either doing or seeing us do something similar for security disclosure processes in projects. So this might be a thing that gets picked up by a working group. I'm happy to connect the dots if that's what you're pointing at.
Yeah, so Luigi on my side, it runs Security Insights. Like it feels like
yep. Well, that's cool. If that's what you're pointing at, then let's follow up after the call.
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome.
All right. I don't see any other hands, so thank you for the update, Michael. Appreciate it. All right, and Ava, over to you.
Great. So I'll be brief. There's no ask here for discussion. Sorry, there's no time here for discussion. Just an ask for doing a little bit of discussion on your own time. Hopefully by now everyone has heard a little bit about the Cyber Resiliency Act and the Product Liability Directive in Europe. These are two pieces of very large regulation coming down the pipe. They have been, I might get these words a little bit off. They have passed sort of the European equivalent of out of committee. They've been approved. They're now in trialogue, with 3 different parts of European government are collectively debating and fine-tuning these. There's not a lot of chances left for public feedback. The OpenSSF did submit our comments. That's the 3rd link I added here. Eclipse Foundation published what I find to be one of the best write-ups out there of the potential impact. A lot of other organizations in open source foundations also published impact statements. I think the Python Software Foundation did the most recent one. And then the OSI collated a lot of that feedback, including actual submissions given to the European Commission on a blog post. That second link I put there is sort of just a clearinghouse of everyone's responses, though not everyone's, over 100. In the Public Policy Committee, which is part of the OpenSSF, yesterday's discussion, the question was raised, has there been a technical review of the likely impact long-term of the regulation as it's currently written, since most of the policy discussions have centered around financial impact, feasibility, is the tooling ready, what's the impact on businesses, what's the impact on trade. I am not aware of anyone having done a review of it from the very narrow lens of, if there's infinite money and time, and we do build all this magical tooling that the regulators are proposing, what's the end result? And since I didn't have the answer, and I thought, well, that's kind of a good technical question. Why don't we discuss that amongst ourselves as the technical expertise in the OpenSSF? We obviously don't have time to do that today. And I'm not assuming that everyone has gone and read all of these things if you haven't been deeply involved in policy. But what I would love to ask is that next week, those of us that are in Vancouver for OpenSSF Day or that are not, spend a little time thinking about this, go read some of the commentary, and then let's have a discussion when we come back together in 2 weeks.
Is the idea to publish a white paper or a letter or something like that with our response, or just have the discussion and make that available somehow?
Yeah, at a minimum, I think the request from the Public Policy Committee was, can the TAC tell us what they think? Okay. So at a minimum, I'd love the TAC to have an opinion on this and say, here's what's great, or here's what's terrible, or here's what we'd like to change, just looking at the technology aspect of it, and take that back to the Public Policy Committee, who then, they might say, great, TAC, please publish a blog post about that. Maybe, David or whoever the next TAC chair is would do that. Maybe the Public Policy Committee then takes it and runs with it. I don't know yet. That's stage 2. Thanks, that helps. I think I saw Jack and then Jeffrey.
Yeah, very quickly. Don't be afraid to read the proposal itself. In terms of reading guidance, there's one citation which mentions open source software in about 110, I think, citations. So you can skip all the others. They're not that interesting. And they also have 3 sections that look very similar because they are basically the same, which is manufacturer, distributor, and importer. They have the same requirements for each. You only need to read one of them. And it's pretty straightforward. It's not very legalistic.
I will clarify that is, I believe, Jack talking about the CRA. The Product Liability Directive goes hand in hand with this, and one cannot really consider the CRA independently from the PLD.
Fair comment.
Yeah.
I think Jeff had his hand up first.
Thanks. +1, Ava, to the observation. The Eclipse Foundation write-up was really well done. And to also very much agree that the TAC has an important role to play in helping to inform the Public Policy Committee. Quite often, public policy representatives struggle with these issues as technologies become increasingly more complex, and they don't have the skills or bandwidth to be able to address that. So if the TAC is able to support the OpenSSF Public Policy Committee request for support, and then lastly, if your own organization hasn't responded to the CRA initiative, encourage your own company to do same, because the policymakers over in the EU will inadvertently have some negative impacts if they don't fine-tune what they're trying to accomplish. Thanks.
And since time is short, I'll add the kinds of evidence that we'd like to see, or projection, or informed opinion would be along the lines of, for example, if it became expensive or somewhat full of liability for somebody to publish a security fix for somebody else's software package, would that disincent security research work and lead to less patches being issued, more bug reports, but fewer fixes and fewer actual distributions and updates and that kind of thing, or if there are other unintended consequences of this that lead to less security rather than more. That's the kind of evidence we'd like to collect, or positive. I mean, no organization is happier than when a government mandate for the products and services it offers is established. So in theory, we should actually be enthused about a government mandate for our kind of thing, but there's something that just feels a little bit amiss about this. And I would love us to just try to understand this better and form a technical opinion on it.
Yeah. And I'll offer my time next week, as I've been pretty deep in the policy world for the past 6 months around this and stuff in America. So I'm available. You all know how to reach me if you want to grab coffee and chat about it.
Awesome. Thanks, Ava. All right, with that, we're at time and out of items. So good seeing everyone. Thanks for the discussion today, and we'll see you next time.